but you had to specify.
Okay, so it's 7 o'clock. We're going to start the workshop portion of our meeting, and Natalie, our city's planning consultant, has graciously offered to talk us through both the self-storage local law and updates on the accessory dwelling units law.
Yeah. So we can start with the accessory apartments local law. That was the local law, the draft local law that was referred to the board at the last meeting. And I think we started the review, and we have some comments from the board that I can just remind us all what we talked about. But I think we noted at the top of that referral letter back to the city council that the discussion had just started, and the planning board wanted to kind of be able to continue that discussion. So that's what we can do tonight. So what got captured in the letter to the city council from our last conversation was that I think we mentioned that currently any application for building permits or construction or reconstruction over 1,000 square feet comes to the board for architectural review, and there was discussion about retaining some level of architectural review for ADUs as well, where there's discussion in the new law of removing that, so we can go back and talk about the specifics. I think there was also discussion by the board at the last meeting about not being confident that elimination of the minimum and maximum thresholds for floor area would actually facilitate additional ADUs in the city, which is the intent of the changes to the code, so we can kind of dig into that a little bit further. And then I think it was also mentioned, one of the comments in the letter was that the planning board reviewed the proposal. What's in the current proposed local law is that an ADU cannot be greater than 50% of the primary building footprint, and there was conversation about whether that should actually be total floor area rather than just necessarily the footprint of the building, but instead looking at the total floor area, both the primary structure and the accessory apartment. So those are the comments that were captured from the board in the last conversation. And you should have, I think, Mercedes, we circulated the materials already for this, so you have there's a large packet there, so I'm happy to go through the memo again of what the changes are, but kind of since we touched on that already at the last meeting, we can just start with conversation.
Yeah, just real quick, I'm reading through the mayor's letter to us, dated 4/2, just to kind of focus us in on what the mayor specifically is asking of us. Let's see. In referring to the proposed local law concerning accessory apartments to planning board review and comment for planning, the city council has requested that the city planning board specifically consider the language in section 223-24, which states that if an accessory apartment exceeds 50% of the primary building's footprint, site plan approval from the building board planning board is required.
Right?
Right?
So right now the language is for accessory apartments with a total square footage that is greater than 50% of the primary building footprint, the site plan approval from the planning board is required. So I think we have one comment there already that it should be the primary building square footage potentially, and not just the footprint.
Right.
And then, so that's one section if we want to dive into that.
And then anything below that threshold, what is the process?
So anything below that threshold, let's see, that goes down to, in the proposed section of the law, that's section J. So the building inspector shall have approval authority for all accessory apartments. This is the proposed language. For all accessory apartments, provided that all setback requirements and provisions of this section are met. Proposed accessory apartments, whether expansions or new construction that do not meet the setback requirements of this section, shall require site plan approval from the planning board. So I think the proposed changes here is what would be coming to the planning board right now as the local law is currently written is anything over that 50% threshold. So because there's criteria associated with why I think that you guys could review in terms of why that might be necessary. And then also if any of the setback requirements, which is already currently in the language, that they don't need to go to the ZBA, they can come to the planning board and have that conversation. So everything else would be approved by as it's currently written, would be able to be approved by the building inspector.
Building inspector, okay.
And the idea of that is to treat it more kind of just like building permits rather than site plan review. But I think what we heard at the last conversation was maybe they're not coming back for a site plan review, but there is still, if we want to think about what the criteria would be, but some ADUs, maybe in certain districts or HDLO overlays or something like that,
Yeah.
that we may still want to, the planning board may still want to retain review of those.
Yeah, that goes to what sounds to me his next paragraph. The council seeks the planning board's opinion on whether site plan approval should be required in such cases. Alternatively, should these applications be referred to the city's architectural and community appearance board of review with design guidelines similar to those set forth in section H? I think that's definitely worth talking about. Or should they be permitted as of right with only a building department review for compliance? I think that's something we should talk about as a board. Any thoughts, group, on that part of it? Sorry, just as a basis, right now, how does the language of the law address either of those?
In terms of what comes.
Architectural review?
Yeah, I think all accessory apartments come before you for site plan review unless they are within the existing structure.
The existing
Right
single-family
now.
home, not.
The existing single-family home.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so right now, everything comes to you
Right.
for full site plan review.
Right, so if something meets the 50% threshold, it comes to us, and then we review it, like like we would typically. And then, I guess the next layer is this concept of architectural review. So to some degree, we do architectural review on all applications that come before us.
Yeah.
Those that don't meet that threshold and go through building department, I guess he's asking the question.
Do you
of
want
whether
those to still come back, but
those
maybe
should
later
become-
on in the agenda?
What is the
Yeah.
mechanism? That certificate of appropriateness?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I personally think yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
And so let's think about the different typologies of ADUs that might be helpful if whether we want to apply it to
Yeah.
all. So there's, within the primary structure, with no expansions to the primary structure. Some people are putting them in the basement or the
Sure.
or attic. There's within the primary structure, but through an addition where you are kind of expanding the primary structure. There's in an existing accessory building, whether within the existing, we've had some that are in the existing garage.
Garage, yeah.
Or we've had some expansions, right? And then I guess the other typology would be new construction of a standalone accessory structure.
I would say that the last three should come for architectural review and certificate of appropriateness. The first one, it's within an existing structure, it doesn't necessarily meet the.
Those are, all
criteria.
yeah, that's already kind of just going to the building inspector, so keep
Also-
that.
I'm sorry. If someone's expanding an existing structure, if they're making much of a change at all, it's going to be coming in front of us in the first place.
Right.
Right? So I think in terms of drafting a law, we probably just need to target the accessory buildings because that's what we're going to be missing.
Well, accessory buildings, but also there's the ADU criteria within an existing structure, unaltered, meaning you're just doing partition changes within your home.
Yeah,
Right? Then, then the next criteria on the list was those that alter that main residence to add an ADU, but otherwise affect the exterior appearance.
Right.
Right, so I believe that should fall under the category of coming
Well,
for
it's not that I
certificate.
agree
Yeah.
with that. I guess what I'm saying is I think that category is probably already coming before us.
In terms of a certificate of appropriateness,
Yes.
expansion of a single-family home.
Or
Or just architectural review, because certificate of appropriateness is just for historic.
Okay.
HDL.
Okay.
Oh, so-
Then I
Yeah.
guess that makes sense then, yeah.
Yeah, so then actually, you make a really good point. We should be more clear, because it should be it should be at the
ARB.
level of an architectural review, ARB. And forgive me, I used the term certificate of appropriateness. That's incorrect.
so basically you're saying if I put an addition on my house, to put in an ADU, you want it to come here?
Yes, for ARB.
But
For
you don't have
ARB,
an,
not.
so if I put an expansion on my house and I'm not putting an ADU and it wouldn't come here?
That's a good point.
I mean.
I think it
I own
depends on the
home, I
square
wanna put a bedroom
footage.
on, my family's expanding, I'm not putting an ADU, it's
That's
not
a good
coming
point.
to you, it's
But
the building inspector only.
Yeah,
But you're also not creating an additional dwelling unit, because that changes, it's a different use.
Yeah.
It's basically a higher demand use, and that's kind of why I swung back over and was like, no, you're right, that should actually really come in front of us.
So an addition that would not be for an ADU, that just would serve, your primary dwelling, if it's for 1,000 square feet or more, then it would come for ARB.
yes.
If it's under that threshold, whether it's to serve the primary dwelling or for an accessory dwelling unit, it's coming for ARB. The threshold for ARB is 1,000 square feet under our code.
That's 1,000 square feet of addition or in
Yeah.
total of addition? So if it's less than, right now, if you're doing an addition less than 1,000 square feet, it's just going straight to the building inspector.
That's what the code says.
Now, I think we want to keep in mind that one of the intents of this was to make it easier to do the ADUs. So I would be cautious about adding restrictions that don't exist now, as, or recommending that sort of thing. So having an addition, right, that was an ADU would be an edge condition. There's a lot of places where, a lot of situations where that's not going to have much of an impact on a neighborhood or the context of the neighborhood. Where it would, right, is there's two places where that could have an impact is an HDLO, right, where it's visible and it's an addition, or where you're adding to the front the street face of a house that's, let's say, set back in the back half of a lot, because a lot of, Beacon doesn't have a entirely uniform residential fabric. There's a lot of diversity here,
What I'd really like to throw out there, because I gave this a fair amount of thought, and it was really probably my biggest takeaway on this, is I don't really know that the 50% threshold makes sense. Or rather, I don't think it's really the best metric to
It feels
use.
arbitrary.
It's not that it feels arbitrary, it's, unless I'm missing something here, the big picture idea is if you're building something big enough, we want to take a look at it.
Yeah.
So the two problems with this are, first of all, if you've got somebody that has a large building footprint on their current lot, they can build pretty large without this coming in front of us. And on top of that, that could actually be exactly the scenario where we want to review it, because they're basically covering up too much of the lot.
You make a good point, 50% of a 10,000 square foot house, although how many of those are there? That's a lot of new construction.
Then the second thing is, we want this to be a matter of easy application, meaning, right, because we're trying to encourage this, meaning, when I was doing my own accessory building, and there's the restriction based on your footprint, I remember I took a tape measure and did all these measurements to figure out exactly what my footprint was. A hard and fast number, like 500 square feet, is a lot easier for people to grapple with an actual application.
That's a good point. If you look strictly at simplifying, from the applicant's standpoint, much easier
Yeah.
to dictate a square footage maximum, as opposed to a percentage. Very good point. Yeah, please.
Yeah, to respond to what Kevin just said, there are some streets in Beacon that are uniform with historic housing, and
I don't think your mic's on.
okay, sorry, I probably want to move.
I got it first.
There are some streets in Beacon that are relatively uniform with historic housing, and I think we should look at ADUs, maybe not so much in terms of a threshold, but just in general, because I'm seeing some things, now that they've been built, that have come before us, and thinking, wow, that looks like a lot more, disharmonious with the surroundings than I ever thought it would, looking at elevations without seeing the context of it. And we do have places that housing is very disparate, but I think we need a little bit more review rather than less.
Okay, but there's another aspect to it, which is single-family homeowners, right? That the case that gets argued all the time is like, I'm getting old, I don't need that space, I want my mother-in-law to live there, or I want to make, whatever. Those are really beneficial things for a lot of people that don't have huge lots and don't have larger houses, right? And so that's an opportunity you don't want to limit. And those are also the people that have the least ability and experience, like hiring architects and engineers and getting access to financing. So there's a sort of a level for some homeowners that would benefit from it the most, right? That you don't want to prevent it from that opportunity. You don't want to prevent them from having that opportunity. You see what I'm saying?
I do, but I don't know if the percentage of cost of appearing before the board, they have to probably hire an architect no matter what to build an addition on their home, or it's one thing if they're going to refinish a basement.
Right.
But I think there's a threshold where it's like imagining that they are they have enough resources to build an accessory dwelling unit, but they're gonna get crushed if they gotta come with their architect before the board for review. That's gonna be the straw that broke the camel's back.
But the council's trying to make it easier for people.
I understand that completely, and I get it, and I'm still not comfortable with reducing the level of review. So I know that I'm giving them the answer they don't want to hear, I guess, but I feel strongly about it, so.
Well, they want our input.
Yeah.
That's why they're asking.
Yeah. So I agree with two aspects. One, David, your point about this idea of percentage, I honestly believe we should stick with the
1,000.
square footage, whether it's 1,000 or not. I don't know if we want to, or have the time to debate that.
Yeah.
Or whether it's arbitrary or not, I don't know. We can talk about it, but I think just in terms of the simplification aspect.
Yeah.
It's better as it is
Yep.
currently. And then this idea of review, I mean, we could test it out and see how challenging it makes Brian's life. That they don't need to come to.
Or you can think back to like past applications that you've reviewed, right? Let's think back to the last few ADU applications. Has there been significant on additions on accessory apartments within garages or accessory apart? Has there been
a lot of them?
There hasn't
I think
been.
that's number one, and
Yeah.
maybe that's what the council is sort of reacting to. I don't know, in that the process is too prohibitive. But at the same time, I think that if there are, and again, I think we need to also then talk about what the controls in place and the mechanisms for Brian would be. If there is a whole series of applications that only go to building inspector.
Yeah, I mean, it would be what's in the code, right? So it would be the setback, meeting the setback requirements, meeting the lot coverage, the height requirements.
Yeah.
I think what's in here.
And that's a whole lot of firepower right there already, right? When you think about scale, context, then I think maybe what we're getting at is a little bit more the aesthetic, right? Context in terms of neighborhood. That's always, falls into this realm of subjective and challenging in and of itself. So,
And to that point, there is proposed additional language in here about setbacks. There used to be conversations just about the setback of the ADU from the property line.
Yeah.
And now the council has added language about recognizing where structures are on adjacent parcels as well. So if you're within, let me find the language. It's like if you're within 10 feet, let me find the language. If you're in 10 feet of not only the property line, but if there's another structure, and the idea there is then you're thinking a little bit more about window placement, doors, lighting, access like that, impacting your neighbor. That's new language that's added. Let me find it.
Yeah, here it is. It's, application to the ARB would be required if the proposed use is less than 10 feet from the property, I think that is meant to be property line, and within 20 feet of any dwelling unit on an adjacent property.
so they're bestowing
So
on
that
us.
would trigger
If you're
zoning.
R15, it's just automatic, basically. So if you're R15, it's just
It's
automatic,
automatic,
basically,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Depending
Like
where
you're
you're,
likely
depending
not
where
to.
you're placing it on your parcel. If
Well,
you have a long skinny lot and you're putting it in the back and the other house is towards the front like yours is, then you might not start triggering, you're right? It depends shape of your lot and where the structures on the adjacent lots are.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
definitely, just like I said, on a
Oh,
50
really?
by 100-foot lot, most
Yeah.
proposals are going to be hitting this.
So there's
Yeah.
another provision that says specifically for the R110, R17.5, and R15, then the setbacks are smaller for when it
5
would
feet,
trigger.
that's right.
Yeah.
Actually, I had a note on that. We need to
Yeah,
add
5
the
feet
lit-
from the
word
property
only.
line and 10 from a dwelling unit. Yeah, 5 feet from,
And I think about
Setback.
some of the more recent applications, that particular subject, setbacks and distance to neighbors, and other, in most scenarios, either other residents or other accessory dwelling units,
Yeah.
some of these can get pretty tight.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of consideration that should go into how these relate to each other.
Yeah.
With such minimal setbacks.
Yeah. So I think that's why it's saying that those ones would trigger I think right now we have that as ARB. So
Yeah.
not that it's not permitted, but if you're doing that, then somebody should be looking at it with a little bit more discretion to think about window placement, lighting, door
Yes.
placement, things like
So
that.
that I think we all agree with.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. Go ahead.
Let me throw one thing out there real quick, because I think it's something that the city council should be thinking about while they're making these amendments, and it otherwise comes up in connection with an application tonight. But the section that addresses accessory buildings, and we were talking about this at the last meeting, and it has that provision in there saying the upper level, any upper level will only be used for storage, and then there's another subsection the city added 3 years ago that says this subsection does not apply to accessory apartments, which is a little nonsensical unless you interpret it as that entire provision doesn't
the
apply to
whole all
accessory
apartment.
apartments. But that means you have no bulk regulations applicable to apartments, and it kind of leaves you in a quagmire where you have an apartment over a garage. Why not amend that language about the second floor to just say, shall only be used for storage or an accessory apartment, if that's what the intention is? I mean, it's much more straightforward.
So I love having a lawyer on the board. Thank you. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Any last thought? I just want to get to the self-storage warehousing one as well. So any last, I think
The last thought, and I don't want to provoke an argument, but I am really concerned
Here we
about
go.
saying there's no parking requirement, because we're looking at the status quo. We've got all these neighborhoods, a lot of them already are deficient on parking. You're talking about bringing in additional families or households from what's there right now.
Yeah.
This could kind of be a problem.
I was curious about that too, because what the new law says is there is no minimum off-street parking requirement. The planning board may, in its discretion, require parking for an accessory apartment that is seeking site plan approval. So this goes back to the 50%, right? So it need to be amended to refer back to the square footage, but it puts the onus on the planning board to determine whether a parking space is appropriate.
Yeah, to be frank, like I said, I'm not trying to start a larger
Yeah.
debate about cars and whether people should use them. Most people moving into an accessory apartment are going to have a vehicle, which is going to mean in all of those cases, there's going to be an additional vehicle.
And I think the
coming in
conversation
order
that the
to-
council was having around this is because we have the primary residence requirement, right? The person living on the site is going to have to be the primary resident, a neighbor within the community, that although we might not have 8 by, or the 18 by, or 20 by 8, 20 by 10, whatever the size of a parking, although they might not have that you are going to try to accommodate that on site if you're planning to do an accessory apartment, because this is your neighborhood. I think was a little bit more of the reassurance that the council had with that. Not saying that's going to work every time or someone's, but that was a little bit of a thought. If you're inviting somebody to live on your property and to live in your neighborhood, that there likely is space on site, although it might be like double parking cars or whatever.
That's
You'd
a
have to
good
figure
point.
it out on a site-by-site
I just read
basis.
the provision about off-street parking. I wasn't even thinking about on-site requirement. Where is that?
Off-street parking, that's on site.
Oh, geez.
I mean, what if we flip basically the presumption?
You wanted to change the language, make it more.
Make it on-site parking. Sorry.
What if we flip the presumption? What if we basically say, if you want to add an ADU that's hitting a certain size, you got to establish that parking isn't going to be an issue. You're either going to have leases that say people don't have vehicles,
Yeah.
or you can make a parking space available.
Yeah, I think rather than putting the onus on us to say, when an applicant comes and says, well, I'm not required to, it's up to you guys to tell me if I need to, and then sit and debate for God knows how long, whether or not, to ask the applicant within some set of parameters.
To show how the parking will be
To show how parking would be.
managed and addressed. Yeah.
Exactly. And if it's then deemed by us, and to be able to prove that they can at least accommodate, I don't know, one vehicle. And if, again, through discussion, we deem, and based on an appeal from an applicant that they'd rather not provide the parking, then we can make that determination. But I'd rather have them be able to prove that they can accommodate some degree of parking, and then have the discussion.
Okay.
There's one more wordsmith, but it's important, so I'll just be really quick about it. In this occupied primary residence definition and the business entity definition, and you're talking about, in particular with regard to a trust, like everyone connected to the trust, grantor, grantee, beneficiary, whatever, needs to be a resident. Okay, that is going to completely screw up people's estate plans. Like, that means if I set up a revocable living trust and name my daughter as the primary beneficiary and my two sisters as the contingent beneficiaries, all of these people need to be living on the property, even though my sisters don't even live in New York, which I'm sure was not the intention.
I was not around when that language was drafted. I know it was very specifically drafted for
I know
issues,
this.
loopholes that were being found, so noted. I think we can bring that up.
Wow.
That's what I do for a living.
Never would have thought that, exactly.
Yeah.
That's great. So you got 4 minutes to talk
4
about
minutes,
the
real
other
quick.
thing.
So you've seen this local law before, except now it's been separated. It previously came before you as self-storage facilities and drive-through accessory facilities. The drive-through accessory facilities has been separated out and adopted by the council. The piece that's before you now is just about self-storage, and now the inclusion of warehouse facilities as well in general, just because they have a similar nature to self-storage facilities. So kind of based on the feedback, both that the council was receiving and that the planning board provided, they have changed to make, what you previously saw was that they were prohibited. Right now, in the code, they are allowed in 3 districts. The last version you saw, they were prohibited in all. Now they have been added back in to the 3 districts where they are currently permitted. They are permitted either by right or special permit, and there's a new subsection with regulations for that. And the regulations are about setting on specific streets within the city of Beacon, setting back the facilities from the front property line. Let me just pull up that language. I don't know if you have it ready for you, in front of you,
So
Jennifer.
that's location, the siting of self-storage facilities and warehouse storage are permitted uses in the GB, LI, and HI zoning districts, except on parcels with frontage on Main Street, Fishkill Avenue, Beekman Street, Herbert Street, or Tyrone Avenue. Shall only be allowed by special permit and subject to the following restrictions. I think what you were referring to, self-storage facilities and warehouse storage shall not be located along the street-facing property line.
So, again, not outrightly prohibited, but I think what the council is getting at is they've identified it as, for the vision that is currently being worked on for Fishkill Avenue, that they don't provide the ground floor pedestrian activation, kind of retail commercial that the council and the Fishkill Avenue Committee are moving towards. So you can still have them on site, but if you're going to have them on site, they kind of have to be set back behind a more active streetscape front facing building on these key streets. And so the council did go through all the roads in the city in which the LI, GB, and HI districts front on, and they looked at each one of those, and these were the ones pulled out as kind of key pedestrian areas, either existing or envisioned for the future.
So just the initial thing I'd say, and I'm not saying this is good or bad, but I'm saying it's something we should be thinking about. When you say, you specifically, when you say in the code, special use permit, the legal review standard on that is going to be, what are of right permitted uses in that district? And if people can say, my application, the way I'm proposing it, is analogous to those other uses, we basically need to grant it. That's basically how it works.
Yeah, there's general special use permit standards in the code, and the applicant would have to demonstrate that they meet those standards. If they demonstrate that they meet those standards, up to the planning board's satisfaction, then yes,
It's allowed.
the permit has
Right,
to be
permitted.
granted.
But the standard is literally, so that means that this use is permitted as long
As it
as
meets X,
Yes.
Y, and Z.
specific concerns that come up from that use are addressed.
Correct.
Yes.
Right. So
Right.
Which is right now, it's just
that's-
permitted without those specific standards.
Right.
So
I-
basically, you're adding an additional level of consideration and placement, locational placement and review.
So this is midway between prohibiting it and doing what we're doing now.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's,
Yeah, it's just,
Right.
it's putting more control in place.
I think it's probably the right move, personally, but
Yeah, I do. Short of outright banning self-storage facilities, I think it's the right crafting.
I mean, look, why don't we ban smoking? It's bad for you, bad for you.
What's that?
Why don't we ban smoking? It's bad for you. Whether we like these things or not, there's a demand for them.
Yeah. We have agreement. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm not advocating banning them. I'm just saying that's one of the alternatives. So, I don't know, generally, group, we feel that this is pretty much in line with our thinking? Yeah,
It makes sense to me.
cool. So, for Jennifer, you'd be drafting letters back to council, right?
Yeah.
You have enough for both of these, based on our discussion? Do we want to summarize for you?
I think that there were a lot of concepts discussed with the ADU.
Yeah.
I think we should go back, whether it's now or whether it's briefly at the end,
Sure.
just to make sure that we have those points, because there were a lot of concepts discussed.
Yes.
I want to make sure we have consensus.
We're at
on what's
7:30
going
now,
on.
so we'll come back.
Yeah.